Hello, my AP students, and welcome. And in this presentation, this little lecture, I'm going to be going over India and the Indian Ocean Basin. So we're going to be looking at chapter 16, and we're going to focus on the political developments that were in section 1. By the end of the lesson, I want you to be able to explain how and why various states of South and Southeast Asia developed and maintained their power over time. So you want to focus in this lecture on how these empires were built. How did rulers create these empires? And then what were the basic characteristics of them? What did this region look like at this time, and what was shaping it? And when we're looking at the overall scope of the AP material, this goes with key concept 3.2. And 3.2 says that there was continuity and innovation of state forms and their interactions during the era from 600 to 1450. So in some places, new forms of governance emerged, including Hindu and Buddhist states. So these are going to be new types of governments that emerged in South and Southeast Asia. So before I begin, here's a little bit of background of India. So India has a history of decentralized political organization, which means that this region, or more properly called South Asia than just India, because there are other parts to South Asia. It's called the subcontinent because it's this giant peninsula that pops out of Asia on the south. And throughout its history, it has never been under the control of one group or one empire. In China, we've seen dynasties that have managed to control all of China for periods of time throughout its history. We saw the rise of the Abbasid Empire and Persia, right? These empires that were able to extend over large territories. Well, that hasn't really happened. There have been empires that have controlled portions of South Asia, but not the whole thing. India is mostly united by a common culture than it is by one particular empire. In fact, it isn't until the British make it a colony that all of the region that we know as India today was under the control of one particular government. So throughout its history, India has been ruled by smaller regional principalities, local power brokers, and whenever you have seen large empires, they've usually depended on the support of some of these smaller principalities to begin with. So they've never really had centralized rule. It's been decentralized rule even when they've built empires. So there was an attempt at centralized rule under King Harsha, and you read about King Harsha in section 1. Harsha temporarily unified rule in most of northern India, but you can even see from the map it doesn't encompass the whole subcontinent. And there's this plateau, the semi-arid Deccan Plateau, that really creates a division between the northern kingdoms and the southern kingdoms in India, and also some cultural differences. Now, King Harsha was able to subdue people that were, refused to go against his authority, but in order for him to maintain his empire, he had to constantly be on the move. He had to constantly be going to check up on the different regions and make sure that the people were loyal to him. And that's something similar, there's similarities between what happens in India to what was happening in Europe at the time. The same thing happened when Charlemagne tried to rebuild what was, to be another Roman Empire. Wasn't able to hold it all together. It was held together during his lifetime because he did the same thing. He on horseback, right, rode around his empire, checking up on all the different lords, making sure they were loyal, making sure they were fulfilling their duties. But when this charismatic ruler that people are willing to listen to dies, which was the case of Charlemagne and also Harsha, the empire begins to fall apart because their successors aren't able to maintain the realm. They don't have that same personality and charisma that gets people to be okay with their rule. So that was the temporary attempt at centralization. Another major political development that India undergoes during this period is the introduction of Islam to northern India. And that takes place where the kingdom of Sindh is conquered. And you can see from this map here where the Umayyad Caliphate was in the Arab world. And you can see the northern kingdoms of Zabul, Kapisa, Kashmir, Sindh, Gujarat. Those are some of the northern kingdoms of India. And so Arab armies reached the Indus River Valley where Sindh is and brought some control to that part of India. However, Islam doesn't necessarily make its way through all of India. That was kind of the introduction, and there are different avenues by which Islam is going to spread throughout India. Another significant way is by the Turks. The Turks are people from Central Asia, and this map here shows you what is Southwest Asia, right? You could see the Arabian Peninsula where the Abbasid Caliphate is. You could see there's a little piece, if you take a look to the very left, towards the top left, you'll see the Byzantine Roman Empire. That's what was left of the Roman Empire still. So that's where Eastern Europe is. And then if you scan your eyes over, you'll see Georgia and Armenia in the Caucasus region. So that region is still part of Southwest Asia. And then if you continue, you pass the Caspian Sea, you get to that region where it says Kangurs, Karluk Uyghur, that's Central Asia. And that's where the Turk homeland is. So Turks are people, they have a Turkic language. They were semi-nomadic, they were pastoralist people who over time are influenced by Muslim merchants who are traveling through the region and by the Abbasid and Umayyad conquerors who had also stepped into the region. So by the time we get to the 1000s, the Turkish people have converted to Islam. And they begin to make their way into the Abbasid Empire. You can see there the Seljuk Sultanate, and they were briefly mentioned in the last chapter. In the region of Anatolia, which is the region between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, it's right here on this map where the Byzantine Roman Empire is. That little orange land, that peninsula between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, that's Anatolia. Today, that's the country of Turkey, right? And we call it Turkey because the people that create an empire there are the Turks, but they're not originally from there. That's not originally where the Turks were. There were Greeks here, there were Persians here, and there were Arabs here when there was conquests. So in the era between 1000, 1200, we begin to see Turks make their way towards Anatolia. They begin to topple or take power from the Abbasid in some regions, take power from the Byzantines, and create their own sultanate. Well, another group, so those were the Seljuk Turks and then later the Ottoman Turks who make their way west. But the Ghaznavid Turks make their way south, and you can see there the Ghaznavid Sultanate makes its way into northern India, and you could see the Indus River that it begins to transverse. So Mahmud of Ghazni was one of these emperors who makes his way into India from Afghanistan. So there's Afghan Turks as well and Uyghur Turks. So there are different tribes of Turks. So Mahmud of Ghazni was the leader of Turks in Afghanistan, the Ghaznavids. And he wanted the riches to the south. So he mounts these raiding expeditions to India, and his whole goal is not to conquer India, but to plunder its wealth, right? That was in the temples. So his forces demolished a lot of sites that were associated with Hinduism and Buddhism, and in fact, it helps usher in the decline of Buddhism. But that starts to then gain the attraction of India by other Turks. So the people who follow Mahmud of Ghazni will eventually then create an empire and settle in India. And so now there's a cheesy joke that's meant to get you to remember an important development in world history, and it's coming in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, cheesy joke, but it's a technique to remember. Where did the Sultan eat? What did he order? And why? And the answer to that question is the Sultan ate at the Dali. And what did he order? Turkey. And why did he order turkey? Because he was a Muslim and he doesn't eat pork, so he couldn't order ham. And I know it's cheesy, and I know it's long, but if you just remember that, the Sultan ate at the Delhi. What did he eat? Turkey. Why? Because he couldn't eat ham. Then you'll remember that one of the biggest introductions to India comes through the Sultanate of Delhi. So the Sultanate of Delhi, right, reminds you that they were Turks. That's why I said they ate turkey, right? So the Sultanate of Delhi was when the Turks entered India. So then you'll remember who introduced Islamic rule to India for the first time. It was Turks that created the Sultanate of Delhi. Okay, and they brought with them Islam. Muslims don't eat pork, right? Ham sandwiches, that's pork. So they ate turkey. That will remind you they were Turks and that they were Muslim rulers. So the Sultanate of Delhi becomes the successors to Mahmud. And they're the ones that introduce a lot of rule, Islamic rule. But the majority of the people they're governing over are still Hindus. They don't eradicate Hinduism. They do help usher in the decline of Buddhism by destroying and persecuting Buddhists and Buddhist temples. Okay, but they used a large army. So we talked about earlier, how did they build empires? This one built it through conquest. They use a large army to extend their political authority over mostly Hindu population. But they don't have a permanent bureaucracy. They don't have an administrative apparatus to govern this land over a long period of time. And so most of the rule was taking place the way it's traditionally taking place in India, with the support of the local ruling elites, with the support of the people that were already in power before, paying their taxes. And so there was instability. And if you read in the book, right, of the 35 sultans of Delhi, 19 died at the hands of assassin. So they weren't always beloved rulers as well. But the impact is the introduction of Islam, especially into northern India. And then in the south of India, remember I talked about the Deccan Plateau creating this southern and northern divide. In the south, we see other influential kingdoms, and one of those was the Chola kingdom. And the Chola kingdom was able to maintain its power by maintaining a strong navy. It uses its navy to conquer Ceylon, which is today the country of Sri Lanka, which is that island that looks like a teardrop in South Asia. And so the Chola kingdom was a kingdom in the southern part of India, and they controlled that southern coast known as the Coromandel coast. And they built it they conquered the local states in that region. But then they used their navy and trade to then influence all of the Bay of Bengal region and Southeast Asia through the Strait of Malacca. They were able to extend their influence because of trade. Another one is the kingdom of Vijayanagara. And I know in your book it spells it without the A, but it's pronounced Vijayanagara. And this was the other state that dominated southern India. And it took from the northern part of the Deccan Plateau all the way to the southern tip of India. This one was founded when Hindus who had converted to Islam under the Sultanate of Delhi were sent to try to bring this area under their control. When they got there, they realized, why not build their own kingdom? They reverted back to Hinduism, they denounced Islam, and they established their own kingdom, but they maintained trade relationships with Muslim merchants. So this was another Hindu kingdom that dominated southern India from about the 14th century until 1565, when it falls to later an empire we'll learn about later, the Mughal Empire. So again, they're not very long lasting, and it's very characteristic of India to have different kingdoms come and go in the south. And then in Southeast Asia, in section 4, you read about kingdoms like Funan, Angkor, the Khmer Empire. And these were empires or kingdoms that were built by trade. They based their power on the wealth that they got by controlling trade. And if you take a look at this map here, the Strait of Malacca is that tiny waterway between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, what is today Indonesia. That strait is navigated by ships making their way from China into the Indian Ocean. And if you're going to go around all of Indonesia, then you're going to spend a lot more time and it's going to cost you a lot more money, so you're going to make a lot less profit. So it's easier to go through the Strait of Malacca and pay whoever controls the strait for safe passage than to try to go around. And so that's what these kingdoms did, and they built their wealth by trade. And these states were influenced by the Hindu kingdom. So one thing that's important to understand is that they draw their influence from the Hindu kingdoms, the Hindu style of ruling, the use of temples to organize communities. They called their kings Raj or Raja. That's how they claimed it. And then they adopted Hinduism as well. Buddhism had spread to this region before, and so some Buddhist buildings become Hindu buildings. And the reason they adopted Hinduism is because Hinduism supports a system where the ruler is at the top of the society. So it helps justify the absolute power of a ruler. And so that's what the Southeast Asian kings liked about Hinduism, that it helped them legitimize their rule and the type of control. And so they controlled the agriculture and the trade in this region, and that allowed them to build some wealth. So Funan was one of the first states, and then Angkor was a later state. And one of the most famous buildings is from the Khmer region, or the kings of Khmer. The Khmer Rouge is a government you'll read about much later, right? So it's going to draw its name from this ancient kingdom here. But today, one of the most beautiful buildings is Angkor Wat, this temple that we see here. And it's also in your textbook. And then there were other city-states, again, that also built their power by controlling commerce in the same region, including the kingdoms of Srivijaya and the Majapahit Empire. So these were city-states. These were smaller kingdoms where one city controlled the surrounding region, and again, they used their wealth from trade and from the merchants coming in to tax them and to use that wealth to then exert their political control. So those were states that were built. Now, what I want to also introduce with this lecture is this idea of a short answer question. And the short answer question is going to be one of the types of questions you're going to see on the AP exam, the SAQ. And throughout this year, we're going to be practicing writing them. So I want to review the 4 E's, which you've already probably been introduced to last year. But using the 4 E's is going to be an easy way to answer SAQs. And that is by explaining, giving me an example that the question asks for, explaining that example, proving it with evidence from history, and then elaborating either on a reason or with some kind of connection. And we'll work on this throughout the year, right? But a sample type of question you'll see, for example, on an AP test can look like this. Explain one method used by rulers in the process of state building in South and Southeast Asia. So from what I talked about, right, you would just explain one of the methods. So my example, my answer would look like this. One method used by South Asian rulers to gain power was to control trade. By controlling trade, rulers were able to collect taxes to finance their armies and conquer. For example, the Chola kingdom in South Asia used a powerful navy to conquer Ceylon and control trade on India's southern tip. This method was also used in Southeast Asia by kingdoms such as Funan and Srivijaya. Right, so I elaborated by making a connection to something else. And these are going to be skills that you're going to have to apply. When you start to write essays, you're going to earn points by hitting certain elements in your writing. And one of those elements is going to be making connections between different kingdoms and empires. And that's what we're going to do in the elaboration piece. Okay? So don't worry, I just want to introduce that strategy. You're going to see this in all the lectures, but we're going to be working on this more next week. Okay, so that's it for this lecture, and make sure to watch the other ones. Have a good one.